Leaders from Pacific Island nations are in Washington for the first ever U.S. Pacific Island Country Summit. Michael Walsh is an affiliate at the Center for Australian, New Zealand, and Pacific Studies at Georgetown University. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mimi.
So why convene the summit for the first time now?
It's a very good question. I mean, when you look back at the late 90s, early 2000s, you already saw Japan getting involved in the region. Australia and New Zealand have been involved for quite some time. China has been getting involved. The U.S. is having this meeting right now, and one of the questions that's been asked is it kind of Johnny-come-lately? Is it too late? I think not. I mean, obviously we have an opportunity to re-engage the region and prioritize the region, but it is a good question, why is it happening now?
How important are these Pacific Island countries to the interests of the U.S., especially given China's rise and a potential conflict with China?
So China is one way to frame it. So it depends. When you look at why does the Pacific Islands matter to the United States, there's multiple reasons it matters. When you look at the census, I mean, we have almost 900,000 Americans identifying as being Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander as one race or a combination of races. We have tens of thousands of COFA migrants living in the United States. We have many COFA foreigners living in the United States who are here studying, working. So it matters on that people-to-people level, and that's where you kind of have to start. And that's what the Pacific Island leaders want it to start at. However, clearly we're in major power competition with Russia and China now. And this region is strategically important to China. China has been trying to make a concerted effort to get leverage, influence, power, and now perhaps military basing in the region.
And what are Pacific leaders looking to get from the United States?
Well, part of that's laid out in the Blue Pacific strategy. So there's a strong regionalism that exists within the Pacific Islands. That regionalism has been under strain lately, but they have a Pacific Islands Forum, and that brings together the leaders from these various countries. And these leaders have sort of charted this new strategy, the Blue Pacific strategy, that kind of lays out what they would like to see happen for their region over the next couple of decades. And now at the White House, what they want to do is get support for those objectives, their objectives, whereas the U.S., while wanting to support those objectives, also has its own national interests at stake.
So the White House invited the Solomon Islands, despite the country's recent security pact with China. Initially, they had not invited the Cook Islands. That changed. Tell me about the invitation list and who's getting invited, who's getting left out.
It's been sort of a controversy, and it's sort of a conundrum as well. I mean, we had reporters who were reaching out asking who's on the guest list as of yesterday. So the guest list has been a point of debate. I think there's some concern if you look at some of the rankings for freedom in the world. Some of the Pacific Island countries don't score particularly well on those rankings. And so there's been some concern about why is the U.S. inviting some of those leaders to the United States. I had an opportunity to speak with the ambassador from Palau on the sidelines of the UNGA last week. And when we talked, one of the things that the ambassador said is it would be a huge mistake not to invite them because we have to engage them in order to have an outcome for the region.
You know, we talked about how the U.S. kind of initially has been neglecting the Pacific countries. How have their attitudes towards the United States changed, if at all?
Well, for decades, the U.S. has been neglecting the Pacific Island countries, and that's been a perennial problem. I mean, we had people at the end of the Cold War who were scholars and fellows in the States who were commenting on this, saying this is a huge mistake. You know, the end of the Cold War provided an opportunity for the U.S. to deepen those relationships, but we overlooked them for a very long time. I think there is a degree of resentment on the part of some Pacific Islanders that the U.S. doesn't put more emphasis on relations in the region. I mean, they provide us with an incredible amount of resources, both on the national security side, but also on the cultural side. And those are often overlooked and devalued. But I think that when you look at the leaders, the people who are coming to the White House, they're realistic. They understand how big power politics works. And what's interesting is when you look at the region, it might be a small region, but they kind of punch above their weight when it comes to diplomacy.
You know, back in July during the Pacific Island Forum, the U.S. announced it will reopen embassies across the Pacific. It's going to reestablish the Peace Corps operations. What has the reaction been? And is that, you know, is it too little, too late?
That's yet to be seen. It's interesting. I mean, will the U.S. lose the Pacific? No. The U.S. can't lose the Pacific. We're a Pacific nation. I mean, when people think about the U.S., I mean, look at where Guam and CNMI and American Samoa are positioned in the world. they're positioned in the Pacific. So the U.S. is a Pacific nation. The U.S. can't lose the Pacific. What the U.S. could do, though, is open the door to other countries coming into the Pacific that have interests that aren't aligned with our own interests. And these are authoritarian powers like China. That's the concern. When you're talking about the embassies and a lot of things, one of the things that I think people have to note is that Congress has played a very active role in pushing for a lot of these things. I mean, when we talk about legislative efforts, we talk about things that have happened when it comes to the embassy specifically. We've had members of Congress come out publicly and call on the U.S. government to expand our diplomatic presence in the region. The question is, what do those embassies look like? I mean, is that a full-time embassy? Is that a brick and mortar embassy where we're going to have somebody sitting there who's actually engaging in the region? Or is that someone who's going to fly in and fly out? And that's what the Pacific Island leaders are waiting to see.
I want to ask you about climate change real quick because, of course, it's affecting everybody around the globe. What's the effect in the Pacific on these islands specifically?
It's existential for some of them. I mean, and that's what you hear over and over again. You have countries like Tuvalu and the Marshall Islands coming out publicly and calling for stronger action from the U.S. and other developed countries because they recognize that it's an existential threat to their countries. So a lot of the focus in the last week has been obviously on the Marshall Islands announcement on the negotiations on COFA and breaking those off potentially for a short term. You know, this event has given them an opportunity from a negotiating standpoint to do that with maximum effect. But the nuclear legacy is a huge issue. But putting the nuclear legacy issue aside, climate change is the regional issue. That's the issue the region cares about most. Major power competition is secondary for them. Their existence as countries, as people.
And what are they looking for from the United States regarding climate change? What do they need from us?
So a couple things. I mean, obviously, climate adaptation financing is a huge thing that they need. They need to have mitigations against the effects of climate change. I think they're realistic. They understand that they can't stop what's happening. So what they need is they need the ability to counter it. And so when you're looking at low-lying islands in the Pacific, I mean, you have to then look at infrastructure development programs that cost a lot of money. And these countries are underdeveloped. And so they need funding to be able to do that. They need innovation, they need programs, they need all of that. So I think resources is a big part of it.
All right, Michael, thanks so much for being on the program.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.